Hi, my name is Noah, and this is how I animate a dragon. Rather than talk about the exact things that I did, the focus of this video is more to show you my overall process. The rig I have before me is a dragon rig used by the CAT system, and the bones are a English dragon that I modified to be the size of a mesh I was given to animate for a game. The first thing I did was grab a reference of what I wanted the dragon to move like. The three animations I had to make were an idle, a walk cycle, and a flying. Now the game is supposed to be an online battle arena. So it's important that even if it's doing something like idle or walk, that it still seems ready to change at any moment. So here I've added an absolute animation layer by clicking ABS and adding the layer, and then turning on auto key. For the idle, I chose to give it a more relaxed feel, but still ready. By spreading out the arms and legs, I gave it sort of a prepared stance. The wings I curled in because I knew they wouldn't be used at the moment. And as I moved everything around, the goal was to match it up to my horse reference of how it was standing. I noticed things like how the butt was about the same height as the chest, but there was a slight curve. Now, since the animations have to be looped, it's important that they have a smooth transition between beginning and end. The player shouldn't feel the loop. It shouldn't be quite obvious, and the best way to avoid that red flag of this is a loop is to have subtle changes rather than significant jumps. So rather than have a large head turn to the right and to the left with only 2 seconds of animation, I've added a slight tilt of the head, a little bit of a bounce, and the wings adjust slightly out and then in. On my second monitor, I have my reference of the horse playing, showing how a horse would move, which is what I'm using to show how it would kind of stand still and what parts of it would bounce. The tail was the last part that I really focused on because I wanted it to follow the rest of the body. And here are my save files. I have versions and then specific parts within the versions along with their own names. This keeps all my files in order, and therefore if I find that the file gets corrupted or I don't like the changes that I made, I can go back to a file that I had previously and have everything roughly where I need it to be. Along with that, under Customize Preferences, there's important things like the undo level and the auto backs, so definitely take advantage of those if you know how. Here I added another animation layer, but this one was the animation layer with a little symbol running, a little man running, and that creates a custom cat rig walk, or a generic cat rig walk. And I pulled aside my reference pulled up my reference to see how it was walking, and then I pressed the button that kind of looks like a dog's paws, the cat motion editor, and I went through each of the tabs and I played around trying extremes and testing to see what everything did. to get the best feel. Obviously, ideally, as an animator, it's best if you can do everything hand done, because it improves your skills. I personally find it to be more fun and entertaining and engaging, but for things like game cycles, often you need to create 10 cycles for 30 characters, or some number that I didn't just make up. So here, the first thing I did, which I would always advise, is I started with the pelvis, and then I moved out from there, and I affected things like the twist, roll, pitch, lift, simply by scaling them extremely and noticing how much of a difference it made, whether it changed the pelvis to rotate a lot more side to side, or if the pelvis had a bigger bounce on it. Those were all things that I had to pay attention to. Some of the graphs and editors, I did not see much of a significant difference, or a difference that I enjoyed. So what I did was I either A, did not touch them at all, or B, I leveled them out so that there wasn't any motion in it. And here I raised the hips to match the chest, and then realized that there was a large popping in the arms, so I later lowered both the chest and the hips so that there was a bit more safe distance, because arm popping or any popping in bones is bad for animation and it will show through. Now here, it may seem fast, but at a normal speed, the dragon walk is rather slow, and it's important to animate to whatever is you're either directed to, or if you're given the artistic freedom, to what you believe would fit the game best. So in this game, where generally you'll be flying when you're fighting other creatures, it's likely that while you're walking, there won't be much interaction. So it's safe to say that there's a good chance the dragon is just walking around maybe a home territory, a base, interacting with other dragon players, purchasing items, whatever it may be. It's likely not to be as intense as while you're in the air. So I chose to give it a slower walk cycle, something that showed it was playing at a good speed, everything moved correctly, the animation time was correct, but it was a bit slower than if the dragon might be ready to battle, or if the dragon might be tired, it's faster than that. It's definitely paying attention to whatever details you're given and making the best judgment calls. Here on my rig, I found things like popping in the front legs, and the best way to fix that was to just play with the settings and see what gave me the best result. I found that it ended up being a offset of the legs, that they were too low to the ground, and simply by raising it slightly there, it fixed the popping problem. Chances are, if a part of your bone is not working, doesn't move correctly, it's a lot of process of elimination, figuring out what does move correctly, and then from there, what needs to flow after it. Ideally, it's best to understand anatomy of animals and humans and everything that you can, especially for something like a dragon where it doesn't actually exist to our knowledge. It's a bit more of a imagination thing, but it's still important to make it look and feel like it's a real creature or animal. So that's why reference is incredibly valuable. The wings and the tail were probably the last things I animated on the walk cycle. The wings are listed as arms, but they are very insignificant in comparison to the rest of the body, therefore I was not as concerned with them. But as I adjusted them, I found that I really liked the position of out and slightly down along with the head. This gave, to me, a feel of being prepared to fly, but not always on edge. So the dragon's ready to take off, but it's not consuming a lot of personal energy. So he's simply holding his wings out to the side and is ready to move if need be. Another thing that's important to know is for things like the tail. Dragons generally have big tails that are heavy, and it can be easy to want it to be very fluid and bend back and forth, almost like a string, but a string has nowhere near the weight a dragon's tail would. Therefore, after changing several settings, I noticed it was best to give it just a slight wiggle back and forth. Afterwards, I played with different limb phases, trying to see which limbs I liked moving a little bit offset from another one. Maybe the left hand comes down right as the right one comes up, or maybe it should come down first and then a little bit later the right hand will come up. It's very dependent on what you're trying to do, what your reference is, and how comfortable you are with the rig that you have. The rig I was given did not fit my comfort level. It was rough for me to animate on, so I made my own because I was given the option to, and went from there. Now for the fly, I added another animation layer, and this one was an absolute. And afterwards, you might notice at first that if you play through while you have 3 animation layers, it's only going to play whatever the top one is. It's simple to keyframe that the animation layers start and stop at a certain point. And here I'm raising the dragon so that it can be in its fly position, having its arms and legs trail slightly down, pushing the head forward for speed, and checking the rotation. And here I found new reference from the movie Beowulf, when he rides the dragon across the snowbank area. Before I went in and made anything look really nice, the most important part of the fly cycle was to have smooth moving wings, because when a dragon flaps its wings, the rest of its body follows with it. If it didn't have wings, it could not fly. Therefore, if the wings are clunky, everything else will look clunky. So here, before I get any of the smooth animation, I'm just timing out the flapping of the wings, trying to make sure that it feels like they're coming up at the right time and then they're hitting down at the right time. A lot of adjustments are just moving things slightly out, making sure that from different angles everything looks good. It's important to understand that often games are from a third-party perspective, so you're looking down or behind your character. So you want to make sure that from the behind angle, your character looks like it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. And in games, often it's not, the rule isn't always as true that you want to animate to the camera, because in games the camera switches a lot. But it's important to see that generally what the player will be seeing is what you're animating to. And then afterwards you want to make sure that from every other angle it's just right. Now, after looking at my reference, I noticed that a dragon's wings will come up at the top and spread out in the longest way that it can. And then from there is where it gains a lot of its flying speed, if you will, or continuance of flying, where it slaps down with all the air resistance. And that causes the dragon to move up slightly and push forward. And here I have the skin on the wings. I animate them to follow through with the main bone of the wing, so as the wing comes down, the skin trails slightly behind, and then as it hits, the wing follows through and goes a little bit past where the wing bone turns, and then comes back up to match the wing bone. As I save these files, I'm making sure to name them Dragon Animation version 3, because this was the third rig that I started working on. 001 was the first one, and then I went from there, and then named it Fly Cycle, legs are done, Fly Cycle, wings are done, and then once the whole thing was done, it would be Fly Cycle done, frames 130 to 200. And the reason I do that is because when you hand over an animation for a game, they are going to need to know what frames your animation is at, so that when they put it into the game engine, they can just cut it really easily and make sure that everything flies, loops, and goes through smoothly. And here's where I added it. Now that I have the wings, I add in the head bounce, the body bounce. Soon after, the tail and the hands will move. For loops, for games, depending on the animation you need, if it's something that's just going to loop frequently and not be significant, it's important not to spend too much time on it, because the player likely won't be looking at it very much, or won't see it, or just it won't be as important of an animation. If it's something more like a kill, that's definitely an important animation, a special kind of kill, so you want those to have more time that you can focus on. So for something like the idle, I only gave it 2 seconds. For something like this, I gave it just a little bit over 2 seconds. Now there might need to be adjustments later, but what's important is that you can get it done quick and send it over so that they can start using the rig to test the game and get something playable. And that is how Animate A Dragon in 3ds Max for games. This was this thing I did for a game internship test, and hopefully it was helpful. I know a dragon is a very specific rig, but the rules apply to everything. It's important to have good reference, a good idea of what you're doing it for, and get the ability to get it all done quick. And then I saved it with the list of the frames, and all I did was use my save files that said idle done frame 10 to 70, walk done frame 80 to 115, and then fly frame 130 to 200. And this way when I send it over, I'll just send it in the text and the programmers will have it all set. So thank you for watching, and hopefully it was helpful.